When Harry says jump, I say hell high. I've got to be honest with you, Bushy. He owns a company called Meriton. These are the largest service department operator in Australia now. His net wealth, as you said, is $26 billion. Oxfam estimated that for the last 4 years, he made $1.5 million per hour. When he came to Australia, he was a milkman, right? Just delivering milk in Chatswood. He said to me one time, he said, Tyron, do you want to know the secret to my success? When times are bad, I buy land.
Welcome to Get Invested on the Property Hub podcast channel, the leading weekly show for Australians who want to learn how to unlock their full self, health and wealth potential. I'm your host, Bushy Martin, and each week I go deep with the best investors, experts, leaders and founders to find out what it takes to break free from the grind, discover freedom and to live by design. Subscribe now and join me and get invested in the life that you really want. Let's get started.
Hi, freedom fighters. How do you learn? How much do you invest in your knowledge and your active learning? Now, while it's good to read books and listen to podcasts like this, real learning comes from observing how it's actually done and then doing it yourself. Because there's a big difference between an ingredients list and the actual recipe, which tells you how to do it step by step and what to add when, in what measure, and at what temperature, and for how long. But the success of your cooking creation comes from watching a master chef do it and then actually being in the heat of the moment and doing it yourself. And you're unlikely to get it right the first time, as it's going to take you many attempts and likely many failures before you refine and perfect the process. Just think back to your first attempts at cooking. When I first left home at 15 to start uni and shared house with a bunch of bachelors, which is a story in itself, I couldn't even boil water successfully. But over time, I slowly perfected the art of creating a stable diet of chunky bolognese sauce, along with my mother's country recipes for tuna mornay and apricot chicken that got me through my single year. So it's amazing what you can do with garlic and onion. Now, a recipe might look great in the pictures and seem simple on paper, but it's not until you actually see an expert do it, with all the intricate nuances that transform cooking from a science into an absolute art form, and then have a crack at it yourself, that you get to test and try, because the proof is always in the pudding. And surprisingly enough, it's no different in the ever-changing world of property and investment. Because you can read every book and listen to every podcast about property investment, but until you shadow someone successful who's done it really well over many years and repetitions and understands the ins and outs until it all becomes intuitive and habitual, where the devil is always in the details, and then you practice the dark art of investing yourself, that it actually all becomes real, because prior to this, it's all academic. So finding a guide and mentor who's done it well and is doing what you intend to do, and then slipstreaming on their success by observing exactly what they do when and how they do it why, so that you can then grow your wings under their tutelage before you fly your own course, is likely to make a massive difference to the size and pace of your results. So avoid the common mistake of just reading and listening to everything and everyone and then just jumping in and endeavouring to reinvent the wheel yourself, because you just don't know what you don't know. And you'll end up making mistakes that you're not even aware of until well after the event. And I'm a classic case of exactly that. I read and continue to read and listen to anything and everything I can get my hands on and my ears into when it comes to investing in property. But when I first started investing, this gave me a bit of a false sense of confidence, as I didn't trust anyone and I thought I'd actually do it all better myself, because my theoretical research led me to believe that I knew what to do, but I didn't really understand exactly how to do it. And in real terms, I actually only knew enough to be dangerous. I could see the finished jigsaw, but I didn't appreciate how and in what order all of the pieces needed to be assembled. Consequently, I made a lot of mistakes and learned some very expensive lessons in the early days. I started with older properties and joint names and wondered why they were costing me so much to hold, until I met my mentor, who opened my eyes to the very significant benefits of building investment properties instead of buying them, with the substantial benefits of building below market value, tenants in common ownership, stamp duty savings, reduced maintenance, and very significant tax depreciation benefits, helping to manufacture equity as well as turn negatively geared properties into affordable, self-sustaining cash flow. And this was all because I had the pleasure of meeting, who was later to become my mentor, George Lucey, even though I didn't even realise it at the time. And it's funny how the right people come into your life at the right time if you're actively putting yourself out there. You see, not long after I suffered my early life crisis in my 30s, when I ended up burnt out, broken and broke, and was forced to start again with nothing to my name, and I was hell-bent on changing my ways by no longer working for money but getting money to work for me, and becoming passive-aggressive or aggressive about pursuing passive income, and ensuring that everything I invested my time, energy and money in from that time on had to grow in value, create residual income and be saleable, I had the serendipitous good fortune to meet George. At the time, back in the late 1990s, my partner in all things, Sonia, and I had one of our many brainwave ideas to create Homer's Donuts that leveraged off the Simpsons show to build a donut and coffee stand in the middle of our local shopping centre south of Adelaide to appeal to the local demographics. And we were convinced that it was going to go gangbusters. So we found out who owned the local shopping centre and then arranged to meet him on a Saturday afternoon. And I'll never forget it, because it was to become one of the most fateful days of my life, but I just didn't know it at the time. So we rocked up to a fairly run-down industrial area and found an old shed that was part of a defunct fish factory in Mile End South, which is just to the east of the Adelaide CBD, and finally found George in a rusty and dusty old mezzanine workshop where his son Adam was up to his elbows in grease and a welder's mask fitting out an old bus. So not the most salubrious setting for what I thought was a shopping centre owner. Now, George greeted me with a bright smile and looked me right in the eyes as he offered me a very firm handshake. We then pitched our Homer's Donuts concept, and after listening intently and nodding his head, he said, I like your enthusiasm, but I'm not sure about your idea. But I've got much bigger plans for you, young man. And from that day forward, he took me under his wing and opened my eyes to a different way of looking at the world. It fundamentally changed the course of our lives, and I can actually confidently say that if it wasn't for George and his family, I wouldn't be enjoying the life I have the privilege to lead today, nor be talking to you here and get invested. You see, what I didn't know at the time was that behind George's very humble exterior was an extremely successful self-made man. It started with nothing and built an empire and dynasty of intergenerational wealth as one of Adelaide's wealthiest property entrepreneurs. Having the rare opportunity to catch up with him regularly in the years that followed allowed me to see and learn all of his property principles, tricks and tips firsthand, as he shared with me that he started building swimming pools and then went on to build all of a Big Four major banks' premises right across the state and then lease them back to them, amongst many other successful ventures. In many ways, he reminded me of my own father, the original Bushy Senior. You see, George was one of those rare men where his word was his deed and everything was sealed with nothing more than a handshake. He didn't need complicated contracts and legalese to tie things up in expensive knots. He would just shake your hand firmly and always honour any commitments, no matter how big or small. If George committed to something, it was as good as done, no ifs and or buts. His word was his bond. He was a stickler for timeliness. He could mix it with anyone at any level, from paupers to prime ministers, and always played the long game by imagining future potential, then investing for decades and doing in days. His zest and energy for life, combined with his can-do attitude and never-say-die approach, inspired everyone around him. And he was great at reading people and motivating everyone to give their very best. Now, I'm sure these qualities, combined with his extreme work ethic and his do-whatever-it-takes approach, contributed to his ability to not only build and own the local shopping centre, but also to own the hectares of prime land right on the edge of Adelaide CBD that the old fish factory was sitting on. And I can't even imagine what that would be worth. And this is just the tip of the iceberg of his property and his real estate holdings. Now, what he saw in me, I'll never know. But from that day forward, he quietly educated, guided and supported me and opened up opportunities that I never would have been able to consider if not for his wisdom and his network. Now, remember that I was starting again with nothing at that time. And despite this, he started by getting me on the board of directors of the local community bank, and he bought me a laptop to help me work as the company secretary. Then when Sonia and I, my wife, started our property management business, he helped us get going by offering us a very cheap initial lease that increased over time as business profitability improved in brand new offices as part of his shopping centre management suite. And when we started our finance broking business, he gifted me and my business partners free office space in the old fish factory using second-hand furniture until we were up and running and profitable. And later he got me into the highly coveted invitation-only Adelaide Club that opened up the opportunity to establish significant relationships with all of the city's movers and shakers. In return, I assisted him and his family wherever and however I could but our contributions paled into insignificance compared to the wisdom he shared and the opportunities he created for me. Some of George's lifelong lessons include that family is always number one. You need to give before you receive. That honesty, integrity, and doing what you say that you're going to do is absolutely fundamental to your success. To always invest in relationships and long-term future potential. To build, don't buy, so that you make it happen, not let it happen. To only invest if you can achieve a minimum of 12% return. And to use your investments to pay down non-deductible debt and get you into freehold possession of your home sooner rather than later, so that you put a moat around your family fortress, and then regardless of what happens, no one can touch you. Now, sadly, George recently passed away at the age of 91 years young, but his legacy lives on long and large in my life, and all of those who've been lucky enough to have been touched by his very giving spirit. And I thank him and his family from the bottom of my heart. Some of George's lifelong lessons include that family's number one, that you need to give before you receive, that honesty, integrity, and doing what you say you're going to do is fundamental to success, to always invest in relationships and long-term future potential, to build, don't buy, so that you make it happen, not let it happen, to only invest if you can achieve a minimum of 12% return, and to use your investments to pay down non-deductible debt and get you into freehold possession of your home sooner rather than later, so that you put a moat around your family fortress, and then regardless of what happens, no one can touch you. Now, sadly, George recently passed away at the age of 91 years young, but his legacy lives on long and large in my life, and all of those who've been lucky enough to have been touched by his giving spirit. And I thank him and his family from the bottom of my heart for all of the lifelong gifts that he shared with me in terms of the wisdom and the skills he's taught me, and I'll forever be in George's and his family's debt, the faith he had in me at a critical time when I was questioning myself and my future, and the ongoing support that he so generously gave. So what about you? Do you have a mentor that you know, like, and respect that has done in spades what you want to do? If not, why not? And what are you going to do about it? If you haven't done so already, take the time now to find them and then reach out to them. I mean, what's the worst thing that could happen? They can only say no or not at the moment, but chances are, if they're the right person and they applaud your initiative, they'll help you on your journey. So don't delay, do it today. And if you're looking for another inspirational and motivational example of someone who's enjoyed the benefits of a great mentor, then you're really going to enjoy today's guest. Tyron, or Ty Hyde, is a successful investor who, as you're about to hear, has also had the rare privilege of standing on the shoulders of titans to enjoy his own success as the CEO of one of Australia's oldest and most well-known quantity surveying firms, who specialise in appreciating depreciation and its benefits for property investors. He's also a fellow author and a podcast host, and by his own admission, he's a bad golfer, a bad guitarist, and has a really loud, annoying laugh. So you're in really good company. And I know we're going to enjoy a great conversation. So welcome, and let's get invested, Ty.
Thank you so much for having me in. By the way, I thought the Homer Donuts was a great idea. I think it would have taken off, and I think Adelaide was the right place. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
No, I've done a fair bit of homework around you, mate, and I know that we share some very similar interests and outlooks on life. But and I know you're well known right across the industry. But for those who don't know you, can you sort of kick things off by telling us what you do differently, and more importantly, I guess, why you do what you do, mate?
Sure. So I'm a quantity surveyor. So in essence, I work out what things cost to build. But I specialised in actually started the industry, me and another firm called Napier and Blakely, started this little niche industry within the industry about property depreciation. So we save property investors money. So it's a vital part of the clock when you want to make that property positively geared, so we can help people save money, basically, Bushy. Why I did it? Well, when I was 18, I didn't know what I wanted to do. And someone suggested to me, why don't you do this thing called quantity surveying, which is a combination of construction costs and maths. And I was really good at maths at high school. So I did that for a couple of years. And then I deferred for 3 years. I did what all good young Aussies should do. I backpacked around the world for 3 years, right? And the number one thing I learned from that, Bushy, was that I never wanted to work for minimum wage again. So I came back and I finished my degree. And in the final year, I wrote this thesis on property depreciation. which it turned out to be quite a good thing because in 1997, the laws changed and they said anyone with my degree will accept an estimate. The ATO will accept an estimate if you don't know the construction cost. I'm like, woohoo, woohoo. And I guess the passion about trying to save people money came from seeing my father lose all his money. When I was younger, when I was 13, my father had a stroke. He was paralyzed on the left-hand side, so he became a cripple. And what happened was they then retired him early from his lecture. He was the smartest man I knew. He had 4 degrees, but he's also a lecturer in psychology. And they retired him early in 1987. And he invested all that money. He had $250,000 as a payout, which is a lot of money back then. Still a lot of money, but it was more back then. And he invested in one company called Estate Mortgage, right? I don't know if you remember them, but they advertise themselves to be as safe as houses. They're investing in bricks and mortar. But what they were really investing in was mezzanine finance. And when the rates went through to 70%, well, the cards fell down, like, you know, how the cards fell down, and he lost pretty much all his money. I think he ended up getting 7 cents in the dollar back. And it wasn't the stroke that killed him. It was getting these letters every quarter from the liquidator saying, yes, Mr. Hyde, you're going to get 7 cents back, you know. Seeing the stress of that killed him, in my opinion. So the passion to teach people about educated property and not to lose money is what my podcast is about. The final question is, I asked all my guests, I asked them, how do you not lose money, right? And I guess that's because I've done pretty well over the years. And I want to leave a bit of a legacy for my daughter to one day go back and look at these interviews that I've done with, and I want to get you on, by the way, Bushy, to successful people and ask them the same 10 questions to unlock the keys to their success. And that's a bit of a legacy in why I do what I do. I know that was a long-winded answer, but I hope something came from it.
No, that's great. Well, that certainly gives us a pretty good picture of the drivers. Seeing your daddy, it sounds a little bit like the rich dad, poor dad story to me. The smart dad, but the poor dad who's got all the degrees, but didn't really understand money, became the driver for you to jump in. Tell me a little bit more about why quantity surveying. So, because there's not many of us that wake up in life, most of us want to be policemen or fire engine drivers or pilots when we're kids, but not many putting their hand up for quantity surveying. Talk to us about that.
And only 20 graduate a year, so it is pretty niche. I think that's a good thing as well in terms of you end up with a degree in construction economics, and it's a practical degree. But as I said, I was the type of kid that I'd be walking along a Pitt Street in Sydney, and there'd be a hoarding, and there'd be a square little, you can see through the hole, a little window through the hoarding. And I would just stand there looking at the cranes. I love that, right? And to the point where my girlfriend at the time, she'd grab my hand and well, come on, get away. We've got the movies running late. I ended up marrying that 17-year-old girl. We first kissed at a high school disco. So the combination of construction love, plus I was did 3-unit maths in school back then. I think I was the only Caucasian to get mathematics back then, 3-unit maths. So maths was a passion as well. So it is a perfect combination for me. When I first started in quantity surveying, it wasn't, not normal quantity surveying is more about estimating construction costs for developers. And that's what that's what we did. And we'd go out, because as you know, Bushy, when you borrow $10 million to build a development, the bank doesn't go, here you go, here's $10 million. They get an independent valuation and they get an independent construction cost from a quantity surveyor. And so then if the number's right, what you'll do is, as a quantity surveyor, you'll go out every month and do what's called a progress claim. And you'll say, okay, the slab support, the brickwork's done up to level 1. You've done 15% of the project. And of that $10 million, the bank will release $1.5 billion, and that will go to the developer. The developer should pay the builder should pay the trades if all things go well. It doesn't always happen that way. So going out to building sites every morning and doing all these, sitting around having a coffee with the Lebanese builders, whatever it was, and I really love that stuff as well. But as I said before, what happened was when the laws changed and the ATO said, oh, look, we'll accept an estimate by you, and I just written my thesis on this. I went, woohoo, I've got a little business here. So I actually left Washington Brown and I started my own business called Property Depreciation Pty Limited. Not very original, admittedly, but
it's on the can. What's on the can is what you did. I like it.
In hindsight, it would have been good for Google SEO, but there was no Google back then. And that business started taking off. And so then my partner said to me, Tyron, why don't you come back and we re-merge? You will go 50-50. And my side took off so much, then I ended up buying him out. So that's how I ended up with this 45-year-old company, even though, I'm 54. So I didn't start it when I was 10. but that's how I ended up with this, what I call a dinosaur company.
No, I love it because I'm very familiar with QS's Ty, because you probably know I used to be an architect in a past life and did that for 7-9 years, and I had a very love-hate relationship with QS's. It started as a hate relationship because whenever you design something, you'd throw it at the QS and you'd say that costs too much and you'd have to print it out. So it became a love relationship when I used to get a QS on board right from the get-go, right before I even picked up a pen and started putting shape around the dollars, so that when I was designing, we knew that it was actually going to come within budget and then it was actually workable. And I can still remember the guy. You probably know these guys, Ryder Hunt, that we used to work with, and John Buchan was the guy that I used to work very closely with for many years back in the Adelaide scene. So I know that the real power of QSs, they can make a massive difference to the cost management of a project, and are worth their weight in gold. And applying that sort of science to the property investment arena and depreciation, there's some massive benefits there, which we'll talk about in part 2 of the exercise. So look, I know you sort of started as a cadet with Washington Brown, and then you now own the company. How did that come about?
So as I said before, so when I came back from university, when I came back from traveling, because I deferred for 3 years, I thought, I'm getting, like, I went back in, I thought I'm getting too old to get into the industry. So now I was like 24 at this point in time. And I look at a 24-year-old now and I think, you're a baby, right? But at the time I felt I was really old. And I went to university one day, and this was before seek.com.au was a thing, right? I've gone there and there was these job ads on the columns, and it said cadet wanted, Washington Brown. Like, woo, Washington Brown, that sounds like a fancy company. So because I felt I was really old to get into the industry, I went and stole all the job ads, Bushy. And I was the only one that turned up.
I love it.
True story. But it was only just one person that was working there. His name was Tony Brown, the Brown in Washington Brown. And I said to him, look, I'll work for you for nothing for the first year, just so I can get a leg into the door. And I had no money, so I was working nights to fund myself, working Washington Brown 3 or 4 days a week, and then going to uni, writing a thesis on depreciation. It was a busy year. But anything, it worked out okay in the end. And I'm glad I did that, to be honest, because I did feel like I was really too old. And I in hindsight now, because a lot of times then you just have the one job, right? But now people have 7 jobs, 8 jobs, which I think is better. But back then it felt like really stressful that you have to get your foot in the door. And so, I guess that was also the catalyst for the success that I've had in my life, to be honest. So doing that for nothing. So if anyone wants to work for me for free out there, please feel free to send your CV. Go to the start of something good.
But it's funny you should say that, because when I finished architecture, there was no jobs for architects at the time. This was back in the early 80s. And the only thing that was being built in Adelaide at the time were headstones, basically. So I ended up working for free for quite a period just to get experience. And then I ended up jumping on a plane and going and working for a crocodile farmer in New Guinea to become his in-house architect. So I know the feeling, mate, but the experience was worth more than the money to me at the time. It didn't worry me that I wasn't getting paid, because like you, I was doing work outside of that to get through. But not many people would have the gumption and the courage to do that in this day and age, sadly.
But the Tony Brown was he was my original mentor, and his knowledge of construction costs and law. So I used to sit there just listening in. There'd be boardroom meeting after boardroom meeting, and because it was a small office, I could listen to all the contract law. So I know so much about that side of it, not just the depreciation side. And that having someone who, like, he was probably 55 back then, so lots of experience. Again, he also went broke during the late 80s, same thing. So he was starting again. But he had a lot of contacts. So he'd have all these meetings with major developers, and I'd just be sitting there up till 9 o'clock at night, 10 o'clock, where these meetings went on, and negotiated the contracts between the builders and the developers. And they just, my ears are like buzzing. I was typing on the one side, but really I'm like listening, going, what can I learn from this? Clause that you're talking about. What's dilapidations? What's extension of time clauses, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that knowledge of learning about building contract law was a real good catalyst for my success, to be honest.
Yeah, I love that, mate. I know that, talking off air, that we've both got an absolute love for Bali, and that you actually ran the company from a bamboo school in the jungle there on stage. Tell us a bit about that.
Well, because I've been with a small one company for so long, my wife and I, we always toyed with the idea of traveling overseas. And look, let's face it, isn't that why we go into business, to be able to live the life you want and to be able to, and for me, living and working and running a company of 50 staff from a bamboo school in the jungle was a big tick box, right? I know it's a bit out there, but there is literally, and my wife was reading this article in the magazine, in the Sunday magazine one, The Good Weekend. She said, she always she's Italian background. Why don't we go live in Italy for a couple of years? I'm like, it's a bit of the time zone's not that easy, you know? And then one day she's read this article, said, what about Bali? And I called her bluff, Bushy. I've been there a couple of times before. I love Bali. I went, yeah, I can do Bali. She went, what? And so we went there. We went over to, and the main reason was because of the Green School, which is this bamboo school in the jungle. If you watching this or listening, Google it. It's an architectural feature. As an architect, you would love it. It's the tallest bamboo school in bamboo structure in the world. There's no aircon, so it's hot. There's drop toilets. The kids wear thongs to school. There's no exams. There's cows and rabbits on the playground. The gym is made of reused airplane tires, right?
Love it.
There's a lot of good stuff that goes on within the community as well. So every day at 3:00 when the Western kids go home, 300 Indonesian kids come in and they learn English, provided they bring in 2 kilos of plastic, right? Which is pretty cool. As I said, there's no exams. The kids learn angles by building mud brick pyramids, right? And then working out the angles that way rather than getting out a book and trying to work it out with a protractor. So it's more, there's only 12 kids per classroom with 3 teachers. And the educational, it is more Steinerish kind of educational model. But the community itself is unbelievable. So half the school hangs out at this Green School during the day. And they've actually got like a WeWork situation there. So I was literally running this Washington Brown from a bamboo school in the jungle.
I love it.
When I came back because of COVID, I'd still be there, to be honest.
Well, no, I love it, mate. I think the benefit of the world we now live in, and COVID's actually made this easier, is that we can operate national businesses from anywhere, anytime. The freedom that gives a lifestyle. I've said to you off air that we're travelling around the country at the moment, and we're operating the business that way. And I'm currently in East Gippsland enjoying the best kept secret, which is Lakes Entrance. It's just a beautiful part of the world. And if you've got the passion and you've got the technology behind you, it's very easy to do that now. So, but I love the courage that you share in saying, right, well, we're just going to make this happen. A lot of people talk about it but don't do it. Yeah, Ty. So love that. Now I know
this was just before COVID, so it wasn't really a thing yet, right? But when COVID hit, we were COVID ready. I'd already set up the staff, and you got to understand, my business is not a bunch of digital nomads. There's people on the ground inspecting properties. There's I won't say real people, but there's actual physical inspections that need to be done. It's not just like we're all coders. So when COVID hit, we were ready. We already outsourced everywhere. I'd sold my office. Literally, I sold like a 350 square meter office in Pitt Street 2 weeks before COVID. Thank God.
good timing.
It was good times. That one was a fluke. But yeah, so we were COVID ready, which I guess, and now in hindsight, you look back and go, why did some of my staff need to travel an hour and a half from Newport to the city every day to be there at 8:30 when they could be spending 3 hours with their kids, right? And we haven't gone back. I have a small office now in the city, but literally everyone is still the same. No one wants to go back to work, my staff, and I don't mind, because that means I have to go back, and I'm good.
Exactly.
I'm good where I am.
Exactly. It's all about lifestyle at the end of the day, and the so-called chat about work-life balance, I reckon it's bollocks, Ty. I think if you integrate your life in such a way that you work when you want to, where you want to, and how you want to, that's the best combination there is. So love that. Now I know that as a business you've worked with the heavies in the industry right across the board for many years, and one of the most notable of those, of course, is Highrise Harry, or Harry Trigomoff.
Yep.
He's often referred to as the $26 billion man. And you've worked with him for nearly 27 years, I understand. So can you talk to us about how that came about, and more importantly, what you've learned from working with him over that sort of period of time?
Sure. Yeah. No, look, he's been I wouldn't say a mentor, but he's certainly been an inspirational person in my life. I must have had hundreds of meetings with him. But he doesn't sit down and say, Tyron, you need to do this. It's, Harry, when Harry says jump, I say how high. I've got to be honest with you, Bushy. But how it started was, So to put Harry's, if people don't know, he owns a company called Meriton. He's the largest service department operator in Australia now. His net wealth, as you said, is $26 billion. To put that in perspective, if you were to merge Suncorp Bank, which owns Vero, AMI, API Assurance, Bingle, and Suncorp, together with AMP, you still haven't reached his personal wealth, right? That is ridiculous, isn't it? Oxfam estimated that for the last 4 years, he made $1.5 million per hour, right? So when he invites me for a 2-hour lunch, Bushy, I'm shit scared. He's going to send me an invoice for the next fortnight. I don't know if I'm allowed to swear this one. I don't know. It is so scary thoughts. Anyway, so when I first met Harry, he's the greatest storyteller I've ever met, right? I was 27 and he was doing depreciation by himself. And someone recommended to him, hey, you're not very good at it, true story. You need to wash your brownie. And I just started doing this. And for the first, it was a 30-minute meeting. And for the first 29 minutes of it, all he did was tell me stories, right? In the last 1 minute, he said, can you help? And the stories were like how his parents led communist Russia to live in China because of the anti-Semitism, or how he was first when he came to Australia. He was a milkman, right? Just delivering milk in Chatswood. Or how he nearly went broke in the 70s. He borrowed money to do developments from Citibank. And Citibank called in the loans. And he said, what do you want? Half-completed buildings? No bank wants half-completed buildings, right? So he said to him, well, I'll finish them. And he did. And then he said to him, and I'll never borrow a cent again. And he hasn't, Bushy. Nothing. He does. It's on the public record. I'm not disclosing client confidentiality. You can Google it. So when you see those 50 cranes on a site, all paid with cash. Not literally cash. Probably used to be, but he's upgraded to the Combank, I think. What do I learn? So, well, the first thing I've learned, I actually talked about this recently. The first thing I've learned from him, he's the ultimate 1% guy. He's a 1% man. I don't know, have you read the book Atomic Habits by James Clear?
Great book.
Great book. I highly recommend it. It talks about a guy by the name of Dave Brailsford, who became the British cycling coach.
Yeah.
And he changed these little 1%ers in the British cycling team. Things like getting doctors in to teach them how to wash their hands properly so they didn't get sore, or teaching them how to use a neck pillow correctly, right? Apparently, 1% is compounded to have this transformation, the British cycling team. They ended up winning 6 Tour de France's, and they hadn't won one before, and they won like 18 gold medals at the Olympics. So this compounding thing, I'm reading this book, I'm going, oh my God, this is Harry Triguboff, and I'll tell you why. So he invites me up to lunch one time at the World Tower. The World Tower is a 75-floor building in the city. It's the largest, or was at the time, the largest residential structure in Australia, in the Southern Hemisphere. And he kept the top third for himself, as you do. But he kept the top floor purely for entertaining. So you get the lift up, the butler opens the door. I'm walking around, and it's the whole floor. And it's like owning a whole floor of Centre Point Tower. I'm walking around, I'm going, there's something wrong with this floor. And I realised there's no bedrooms, Bushy. It's just got a kitchen, right, and bathrooms, and he's just using it for entertaining.
I was thinking, clearly Harry doesn't sleep. That's probably what he's got.
No. He said it's too good to have bedrooms. And he came up there, and he's at the table. He sits next. He says to me, "Come next to me. Come next." So I sit down next to him, and I said to him, "I've actually got a photo of it. Here we are. Here's a photo of, if you can see that on TV. I'll send you the photo. You can edit it in. But here we are at this lunch." I said to him, "Harry, I've written a book." He goes, very good. That's how he talks, very good. I said, it's about property depreciation and tax and investment. He goes, very good. I said, Harry, there's a chapter in there about you. He didn't say very good, Bushy. And so I said, oh, look, I think it's only fair that you read it before it goes to press. So I give him the chapter, and he starts turning over the page and reading it. There's silence. There's always an entourage with Harry. And there's just, you could hear the pin drop when he read it, right? It was pure silence. And he finishes the chapter. He looks up and he goes, very good. Anyway, so I gave him a pen. I said, Harry, can you sign something for the book? He goes, sure. He grabs a napkin and he writes on the napkin. And he wrote this. He wrote, I made up my mind to work with Tyron when I saw him. I never went to another quantity surveyor and I never regret it. And he hasn't. And you know why he wrote it on a napkin? Because he's never used a computer in his life. Come on, he doesn't need a computer. If he knows he can buy land for 150 per site, build it for 350, sell it for $1 million, the site works. He doesn't need a Macquarie Bank algorithm. He didn't start with one of those. Didn't start with a computer. Anyway, here comes the 1%er. So the book gets finished, published. I sent him the first copy off for the press. His EA rings me up a week later. Mr. Triguboff would like 6 more copies, thank you. I'm like, okay, why? he wants his executive team to know what you do. I went, okay, that's pretty cool. And then for the next year, every week he invites me in for 5 minutes, summons me in. Tyron, teach me something new about depreciation. By week 38, I'm running out of tips and tricks. I've got to be honest with you. But I'm thinking, if that's what he does for me, this little niche business of that, if he's doing that for all his engineers, for everything, his compounding effect is just off the Richter. His thirst for knowledge is like nothing I've ever seen, Bushy. So that's one thing I've learned from him. So I don't know how probably investors can portray that into their own things, but, the thirst for knowledge is compounding effect. I've got 7 of these. That's the longest one. Shall I keep going?
Yeah. Just give us a couple more of the real key ones, I reckon, Ty.
KISS. The KISS, keep it simple, stupid principle, right? So Harry, he's stuck in his lane. Like for me, I don't know about you, but I've started so many different businesses, right? And sometimes, like from due diligence reports, dilapidation, I created a competitor myself once, and I even created a competitor realestate.com at one point, right? Which didn't work. So, but not Harry. No, he's just stuck in his lane. He's just built apartments, right? He could have gone down the commercial property angle with his teams, industrial property, but he's just stuck in his lane, and it's worked. So I've pared back all my other businesses and just do the one now. The other thing he's kept it simple, stupid, is he's designed. They're square. You don't see many curved balconies or curved slabs, right? Because they cost more. If you build a square building, you can stack the kitchen on top of the kitchen. The plumbing goes right through. It's cheaper, right? So he's kept it simple, stupid. So what that enables him to do is to sell a bigger apartment compared to the competing developer down the road. And look, let's face it, you can't live in a facade. And we all know that size matters, Bushy. All right. I'll give you a couple more. Okay. Follow the leader is another one I would say. Following the leader. I've made a fair bit of money out of Harry, but if I just followed, so I've got clients or had clients like Lang Walker, he passed away, Tim Gerner, Harry. If you follow the leader, not the herd, and find out when Harry went into different areas over my life, if I just bought a townhouse around the corner a couple of times, it would have been better off doing that than what the fees I've been able to charge him. Same with Lang Walker. So follow that. And as property investors, what we can do, you can find out where the next Bunnings is being built in Cordell's. Bunnings have a team of demographers working out where to go, right? They do the work for you. So that is one idea that you could follow the leader as a property investor, if you ask me. Another thing, I'll tell you the secret. I'll tell you the last one. The secret to his success. He said to me one time, he said, Tyron, as he talks, and sometimes when he talks, he has a higher intonation on the last word. So he said, Tyron, do you want to know the secret to my success? Now, I'm not going to say no, Bushy. Yes, Harry, what's the secret to your success? And I love this. This is one of my favourite quotes. He said, Tyron, when times are bad, I buy land. By the time I get development approval, times are good again. Now, I'll say that again. When times are bad, I buy land. By the time I get development approval, now that can be 2 to 3 years in his case, and times are good again, right? And what does that mean? That can be a metaphor for life, for business, but certainly for investing. And what it means is ignore the noise. Back yourself, right? Someone like Harry, it's not a case of whether he times the market or has time in the market, you see. So what he does is when he builds it, he keeps half his stock. So what Harry does, he does both. With his wealth, he times the market and then he has time in the market. And if you can do that, my friends, you've found the holy grail.
100%. He's combined both. And the other key message that I'm picking up from that is that, because you would hear this all the time, is now a good time to invest? I hear this all the time because for me, it's never been about when. It's you invest every time you can. It's what you invest in and where you invest that's actually going to be the key exercise of that. So I love that, mate. That's some, and we could have another podcast just about that, I reckon, which we might do at some point in time. But mate, I guess something that I'd love to circle back to your story before we jump into your personal property journey. Yeah. If you look back on your life so far, Ty, what challenging event in your life has brought about your greatest learnings and your best changes, do you think?
Sure. Well, to be honest, me and my wife, we struggled to have kids for a long time. We had 8 miscarriages, and then I had a son that died. So that was about an 8-year period of hell, to be honest. That was a very challenging moment. I might get emotional here, but I guess learning to take life but appreciating life is the greatest thing I've learned from that. So it's very hard, especially for both of us. I don't get emotional now, so I might move on from that one. But so that was definitely the greatest hardship I've had. Burying my son was bloody shit. So, he didn't like, so that was tough. From a business point of view, I guess changes in tax laws have been a personal thing. When out of the blue in 2017, the government said we're going to stop investors claiming depreciation on second-hand plant and equipment items, and no one saw that. So I'll just explain that to the audience. If you buy a brand new apartment now or house, you can claim all the ovens, the dishwashers, the bricks, and the concrete. But the moment that I sell it to you one day later, you can no longer claim all the ovens and dishwashers. You can only claim the structure of the building. But that's a large proportion of what we do. We're going out inspecting those. So the product that we have is being limited. And so what I did was, when the laws changed, that was in 2017, when the laws changed, I said all to my staff, oh, by the way, I just want to piss off and live in Bali for a couple of years. Let's work it out as we go. We already made plans. So that was a challenge. It didn't affect us as much as I thought. But at the beginning, it was definitely a bit nerve-wracking for everyone. So that was a challenge. I think that's always going to be an issue with my business, is the legislative change could come along and change and say you won't be able to claim. I don't think they'll ever stop depreciation for new property or commercial property, because there are powerful industries like the property council who have better lobby groups than the residential property market, and they won't stop it for new property because developers rely upon those numbers to help sell the property, right?
Yeah.
The last thing all they want to do now is amp and supply. Construction costs are doing a good job of that by themselves, right? So I don't think they'll ever stop that, but they could stop it for second-hand properties full stop.
I think, and again, this is a message that I'm banging loud and hard to anyone will hear, that while there's a lot of short-term, reactive, short-sighted policy stuff that's coming out of government at the moment, that it's targeting private mum and dad investors as the villain in the whole housing affordability, housing supply exercise. My own view is that 80% of residential housing stock is still in the rental areas provided by mum and dad investors. We need to be taking a lesson out of the when negative gearing was reversed after Keating, and how it brought in the legislation that's incentivised mum and dad investors to get into property using depreciation as a big lever in that. I think we actually need to be reversing it to actually embrace residential property investors as the answer to the housing affordability issue, not the problem that they're being painted as. So, one of the things I'm pretty keen to do is to make as much noise as we can to as many people as we can, that actually thinking hard and smart about depreciation as another incentive to reapply it back to existing property may actually go a long way to alleviating the housing crisis that we're currently suffering. What's your view on that?
Absolutely. So I had this conversation with Terry Ryder the other day. We went toe-to-toe with 3 ideas that we could bounce to help the housing crisis. One of mine was a bit controversial, and Tender said, Zach, what you just said then, we could increase the building allowance to encourage activity. And that's what it is, a tool. It's a lever the government can pull. So people might not know, but there are certain building types that get a 4% building allowance, which is like service departments. And that's they say, we need hotels now, we'll give you a 4%. They're doing that with the build to rent at the moment. They've increased it, but they could. I don't see why people. So in order to get the 4% allowance of the build to rent, you have to be building 50 apartments, right? Not many people can afford the 50 apartments. So why not make it more available to the mum and dad investors as well and increase it to the 4%? They get it back. They claw it back when you sell the property anyway. Yeah. But I do think they could tinker with negative gearing. I think they could. If I was to solve the negative gearing issue, I can see why people have problems with being able to claim that loss back onto your personal income, right? So you could quarantine it, in my view. So to that property, that's what happens in a lot of places around the world. So that will have, it won't hit the coffers as much until you sell the property. And the problem is saying, just you can only do 1 property or 2 properties is, what happens if, there's a lot of problems with that, because you can have it in many different entities, right? You can also have 3 that are positively geared, 2 that are negative. Does that counterbalance them out? So I don't like that as a strategy. I think that's just purely a political talk making me look good, right? We're going to crack down those negative gears. So what I would do is I would quarantine the loss until you sell the property, or positively, because they can be positive as well. So it goes both ways. You can actually be positively geared as well,
Totally.
And so if you have a property that was, say, negatively geared at the beginning and then became positively geared, and then and when you sell it, they even themselves out, well, there's no CGT payable. That is within that property, within that one entity. To me, that would make a bit more sense than what's currently out there as an idea, and what I guess is the political ideas, I guess. Yeah.
Love your thoughts on that. Now, I want to sort of jump into your personal property journey, if you can, because you've worked with the biggest, the best, and the latest and the greatest. Talk to us about what interested your personal entry into property, and take us through what you did, why you did it, and the good, bad, and ugly, and the lessons you've learned on your personal investment journey.
Sure. So I guess I've always been bullish on property. I love property, and I guess having being a project auditor on a job, which is the first property that I bought. Actually, in actual fact, the first property I ever bought, which was 1995 or something, actually worked out to be the best return on investment I ever made. So I was the project auditor on a job in Balmain, Darling Street, Balmain, and I was, which means I would go out every month and do those progress claims that we talked about. And I got to know the developer. I put $1,000 deposit down for this apartment. It was like for $240,000. And back then he didn't want the 10% until we settled. But what happened was the builder went broke, and the project got delayed for 2 or 3 years, and I helped him manage the project out. Now, by the time the project came to settle, the property was already worth about $350,000, right? Yeah. And so, he didn't ask me to put in more. He asked some of the other interests to put in. The sunset clause had gone, so he asked some of the other clients to put in money. But he didn't ask me because I helped him project manage the job out. So that $1,000 ended up turning into like $120,000 profit over a 3-year period. Now, that's a pretty good percentage increase, right? So that was a bit of a catalyst for me to go into other properties. And so most of the early properties I had, because I had no money when I started, were with other people. So fractional investing. And with my brother, my girlfriend at the time became my wife. We went 3 frees in, and the first 3 were all involved with the jobs I was working on. One was at the Finger Wharf at Woolloomooloo. Len Walker was the client. So they was like, I would get all the plans. I go, well, I know this developer's good. So you could say I was cheating a bit.
Wow.
But if you're a carpenter, you're not going to charge yourself out, and you're going to do what you do, right?
Exactly.
And that worked out well. So I worked out the other day. I bought 22 properties in my life, and I've never lost money on property. I've lost a shitload of money on shares, but never on property. I guess that is in my wheelhouse. And if I look back at my time, I would have probably just stuck to property, to be honest. But I do like share investing as well. I think I find that the challenge of shares, of beating the market, something I was competitive by nature, Bushy. But it's really hard to beat the market. Huh?
I was going to say, being there myself, and for myself, that's been a fool's errand, that one on myself, because you try and outpace it, and if you look at all of the data, it says that the best investors are dead because they don't try and toy with it or muck around with it. But mate, can you think back to what your investment strategy was when you first started, if you had one, and how has that changed and evolved over time, and what's it look like now in terms of where you're heading?
Okay, so it definitely was at the point at the beginning to be able to do anything just to get into the market. Again, as I said, I didn't have any money, but I knew the mathematical equation of it because I was, wrote my thesis on depreciation and all that kind of stuff. But back then it was just to grow as quickly as I could, and via into investments with other people just to get into the market. Over time, I guess as you become more wealthy or whatever, I've dumbed down now. I'm the worst property investor in the world now in terms of gearing. Like I don't really have any gearing anymore. I'm very, it sounds like a wanker, but it's a nice position to be in. At one point, I used to have so much debt I couldn't sleep. And a lot of it was on the stock market, not on just property. We'll go back to property, but a lot of it was on the stock market. And I couldn't sleep at night. And so having twice lost, the GDP of a small African nation, I decided I don't want to ever borrow money ever again. I know it sounds like, you're good on you, Bushy.
But like Harry now, mate.
Yeah, well, it's just, but it's not because of that. It's just because of the stress that I went through to try and be the richest man in the grave nearly put me in there. And so when you can get into that position, it's very nice to not have to bloody worry about a bank.
100% agree. Yeah, if you look back on your investments so far, what's been, you mentioned your best, what's been your worst? Learn from that one.
Okay, cans. I bought cans. Didn't actually make me any money. I paid about $150 for it. I thought, oh, that's really cheap. So sometimes buying the cheapest isn't the best you can do. You'll get paid went okay. I ended up selling for like $160, but I held it for 10 years. And with that low price point, you end up spending more time on paperwork than growth, you know. And if the tenant's not good, or so, it paid an average yield, but there's a lot of problems in those properties up there with insurances and all those levies that I didn't, you don't factor in the fully. I think like there was a flood up there that it just doubled. It's like, how do you predict that into your forecast modelling, right? So I think that has probably been the worst property investment I had. Even though I didn't lose money, it was probably the opportunity cost of what I could have done with that money. But I'm a bit, these days I had Chris Gray on my podcast, and he's pretty much buy blue chip, right? That's his goal. And I think if you can do that, or even with others, it is a lot safer. Like, they're not building any more land in Bondi, or, but they're saying, they buy property, they're not building any more land. That's a myth, because they are. They're chopping up sites and subdividing it, right? They are building more land. So don't just think, investors out there, that you can never lose on property. You can lose, definitely. You can. Like, we see it a lot of the times, because we do reports and we see someone bought this property 10 years ago, and today it's still worth the same. You might not have lost, but you've lost. So they are building more land. Don't fall into that myth spooked by other people saying, oh, you'll never lose on property. And if someone says you have to hold this property for 10 years to worth it, there's a reason why, because there's so many fees involved. So if you've been told you have to hold it for 10 years to make it work, run.
Yeah, I like you thinking about that. If you were starting out again, Ty, what, if anything, would you invest in differently, do you think?
I probably would have bought Bitcoin when I first heard about it. That had only done well. Look, I probably would have okay, here's one thing I would have done. I would have learned about exchange-traded ETFs, right? Exchange-traded funds, where you in the stock market, because you don't have to worry about knowing the financials. And the reason is that companies can lie, and so they can fudge the numbers a bit. And so rather than worrying about one company with one industry, if you're buying an ETF, whether it be the whole of the ASX 200 or into an area, you can buy ETFs just to focus on AI, right? Which I've got. So if you think that AI is going to be here for a long time, don't worry about buying. This is not financial advice. Don't worry about buying one or two chip makers. How about you buy a fund of AI? So buy the theme rather than the company is something that I would have wished I learned a while ago.
Yeah, I love that one. I've often said that, particularly in equities, you got to bet on the race, not on the horse. If you bet on the horse, you'd likely be a loser. But if you think the race overall is going to do well, if you buy index funds or ETFs, you're basically buying a chunk of all of them. And as long as it's going in an upwards direction over the long term, you're going to do very well. And it doesn't take much time or energy or emotion to do that. So there's some other benefits in that as well, mate. Now, love you sharing all of that. We're now going to jump into what I affectionately refer to as the ambush or the bushfire lightning round, where I ask you 4 fast questions that the listeners all want to get your words of wisdom on. And I guess the first of those in part 1, and we'll do the same in part 2, is what superpower do you wish that you had and why, Ty?
Oh, I wish I could fly. Who wouldn't? Hey, with the traffic in Sydney, if we could nip over to North Sydney quickly, that'd be handy. I definitely wish I could fly. That would be just, how cool would it be to be able to fly?
100% agree. I've often thought the same thing. Now, you've had some copies with some great people over your time, and Harry and Len Walker and others. But if you could have a copy with anyone, either alive or dead, who would you choose and why?
Sam Altman. The guy that just is founder of ChatGPT. I'm really fascinated in that kind of where on, pick his brains on where is that going, because it's going so quickly. I'd really like to know. It's scary and bad, but it's just fascinating. Like I typed in the other day, I said, I'm starting out, write me a business proposal on creating a property depreciation company in Australia. The answer just blew my mind away. It also said, It came up with a SWOT analysis. It said your major threats will be Washington Brown. That's what it said.
Is that right? Is that right?
I know you're bloody smart.
Love that. I guess the next question, back in the literary field for a second, what would be the title of the book about you?
Well, there already is one. It's called Keep Claiming It. It's available on all good bookshops.
Yeah, no, okay, answered that pretty well. Back on the investment subject for the last one of the round, but what's both the worst and the best piece of investment advice that you've ever received?
The worst was, it wasn't actually spoken to me, but I was reading a brochure from Leveraged Equities, and it looked at it and it showed you how good shares can be if you're leveraged into them, and how it didn't really show you how bad they can be, but it showed you how good when the stock market goes up, right? And it can be. The problem with leveraging into shares is that when the market falls, the shit hits the fan, and and even though you have good stocks, the banks are ringing up people going, you got to sell, right? You get margin call. And so there's a snowball effect of what happens to your investments. And so whilst you may have had good investments, you can be reselling them at ridiculously stupid prices. So that's probably the worst investment I got. The best investment I got was advice probably, which I didn't take, was don't ever borrow money to buy shares. So I wish I did. But I certainly would. That would be the best. That would be the most number one investment advice I'd give anyone listening to this. Never, ever borrow money for shares. Someone said to me once, if you can't own a share outright, don't. And so I would wholeheartedly agree with that.
100%. I used to, well, before I got into property many years ago, when I was getting myself back on my feet, Ty, I actually traded CFDs. Yeah, exactly. They were leveraged 100 to 1. And I was getting into the sectors because I was on a hell-bent mission. Same thing, wasn't thinking of the risk. Where there was nights where I'd have guaranteed stop losses and everything else in play to try and manage the risk. But if the market closed at one level and then opened well below that, didn't matter what the guaranteed stop loss did, you took the hit. And I would lose 30 grand overnight, just like that. And so 100% agree with what you're saying there.
Even if the thing is that you're right, that's a very good point about guaranteed stop losses. If the company goes into a trading halt, right, and then open and says we've got a revenue, we've forecast revenues going really bad, it just bypasses your trading your stop loss.
Yeah.
So beware.
You take the hit. So I agree with you. Very volatile. If you don't have the risk appetite and you don't have a big trading float that's going to cover that, don't even think about it. So I love that. That sort of brings us pretty close to the end of part one. So if you look back on your personal, professional and property journey, what's the one question that you wish I'd asked you, and how would you have answered, Harry? Ty? You even sound like Harry, mate, the way you've been finishing your sentences, so I've been thinking Harry.
What's the one question you would like to have asked me? I guess, what have you learned from your podcast? And I'd say, so my podcast is called 10 with Ty, and I asked the same people the 10 questions. And I think the number one thing I've learned from that podcast is education. Like it's funny how I ask the same 10 questions and I get completely different answers from everyone, right? And one of the questions I asked is, if you could go back in time and tap yourself on the shoulder, 20-year-old self, what would you tell yourself? And another question is something like, if your 20-year-old son came up today, what would you tell your 20, and he's got 20 grand to invest, what would you tell him or her, your daughter? And a lot of those answers have been about educating yourself at that age. It's not, rather than putting an equity, trying to find something there. And I think that's true. I think trying to educate yourself, spending that money on self education at that young age would be a key to success. And I'd encourage that. And I guess the good news is now there's so many good podcasts like yourself that you can, which weren't around when we were 20. So there's definitely educating yourself with something that
beautifully said. And that education never stops, Ty. I'm a bit older than you, and I'm still learning something every day, whether listening to a podcast or reading another book. There's never a day that goes by where you can't add to your knowledge.
Yep.
So look, I really want to thank you for taking the time to share the ins and outs of your awe-inspiring and entertaining journey so far, Ty. And before we close off, if anyone would like to explore the inspiration information further that Ty shared with other like-minded investors, and I'd very safe, relaxed and no pressure environment. Feel free to join us on the Property Hub Collective Facebook community by just clicking the link on the show notes, and we look forward to connecting with you and continuing the conversation there. We now look forward to continuing our chat with Ty in next week's episode, where we're going to deep dive into how you can significantly improve your property cash flow affordability and save yourself some money using the little known and underutilised benefits of depreciation. So we look forward to getting invested with you again then, Ty.
I can't wait. So we're going to talk about the sexy stuff next week.
Stay tuned for part 2 of this interview next episode.
Thanks for tuning in to Get Invested on the Property Hub podcast channel, your home for property investment insights and inspiration. Make sure you subscribe to Property Hub for free. Get your weekly dose of Get Invested inspiration along with every episode of Realty Talk, Australia's top online property show for red-hot property investing news and insights direct from industry leaders and influencers. And finally, I'll see you next time.